I say this a lot. I feel like it's missed, lawyers especially. And I was 100% at fault of this when I was a partner in a law firm, not fundamentally understanding how the firm made money and then being surprised when I did something they didn't like. And I think that is fundamentally important. It always blows my mind how many people just have no idea what a P&L is, or like how to even read a basic financial chart, right? And so my curious to you is, how have you helped your team learn those skills?
It's, in my view, this is really fundamental to building a healthy workplace. And that doesn't mean I've always gotten it right. In fact, I will say this was particularly a struggle for me at High Impact. We had a big team of artists. You know, we had medical illustrators, we had 3D animators, and artists, I found, you know, personality wise, don't generally like to think a lot about the financials. They want to make art. They want to make something that's fantastic, and that's a great starting place. But we were not a social club for artists. You know, we were not making this for fun. We were ultimately a business that needed to deliver profits for investors. And that's a hard reality for people to sometimes come to terms with. I did find that it was a little harder there to get them to sort of marry both of these things are true. You do need to make great art. I don't want you to make garbage. And yet also, if you're just making great art and it's not what the client asked for, or it's not, you know, helping their case, or it's, you know, taking you 5 times longer than we thought it was going to take, all of those things are going to interfere with the business. And eventually, if we just let that go as a runaway train, there will be no business. And so I think there's kind of that layer. But the second layer that I think is true across almost every business is that you have to be careful that your frontline employees almost always are aware of your gross margin and not your net margin. And that is a huge, huge risk to leave unaddressed, in my view. So if you flip burgers for a living, and you know that you signed the order form for the burgers that came in the other day when the guy had delivered them, and you saw that it was, you know, $400 for that box, and there were 100 of them, so $4. I'm making up numbers. That's not a good number, actually. Let's just say it was 200 or whatever. But let's just say they can figure out you got a $2 cost basis. You sold it for $8. Oh my God, they make $6 on every burger. You know, why am I not making more money? This place sucks. And so you can get this really negative morale very quickly because everyone figures out your gross margin or close to it very quickly. What they're not thinking about is how much was the rent on that, you know, prime location in the mall that they have, and how much of each burger does that eat up? How about the fact that, you know, hey, you know, that benefits package that you know, you think is not too bad, maybe it could be better or whatever else, costs a fortune. And, you know, all the lights on the signs and in the building, turns out that electric bill is huge. You're in the middle of the desert. Did you know how much your air conditioning costs every month? And so as you start to go through all those things, and insurance and all these really boring things, lawyers' fees, and, you know, your software systems, your point of sale system, you know, all these kinds of things add up way, way, way more than people typically think. And, you know, it's not uncommon to see businesses that have, you know, a 75, 80% gross margin and a 10% margin at the bottom line. And yet it's really dangerous, in my view, to leave people, again, they always will see that 75, 80%. In fact, they'll usually overstate it because they usually forget one or two of the items that, you know, using my burger analogy.
Onions.
Exactly. They forget the onions, and that, you know, that they go bad quickly and they throw away a lot of onions or something like that. So they're still going to underestimate that, but they're going to be a lot closer on that. And they just completely don't see how much all the other stuff adds up. And yet they also feel it when those things go away. You know, if you have a dysfunctional HR department and nobody can answer your question about why your paycheck looks the way it does, you're going to be really pissed off, you know? But it costs money to have people who can answer that question and make sure that it's correct and that it shows up on the right day and all of those things. And so helping people sort of bridge that gap mentally, that, look, I don't need you to worry about this. This isn't your problem, but I do need you to be aware of it. And maybe saying this isn't your problem isn't even the right thing, because ultimately selling those burgers has to fund all this other stuff in order for us to all do this. You know, and no, it's not that we're making 80 cents on a dollar. It's nowhere near that point. So I find that that's that's a really critical thing to get people at least roughly in line with. And if you're a private company, you can't necessarily share all the details of your financials, which makes it, it sort of sucks that you have to talk a lot in qualitative terms instead of quantitative terms. And this comes back to then making sure that people trust you, because that's all they're going to have to go on. They're not going to get to see the financials. And so you do need to build the trust for them to hear you say that and hopefully come away understanding, oh, he's telling the truth. We do need to slightly improve our efficiency, or we're in a bad spot, even though it looks like I'm, getting underpaid.
I think what's also important in that analogy is sometimes you can have employees, teams, senior executives who are great at pushing one thing that you sell, one product you sell, without any concept of whether that's good for the company or not, right?
Exactly.
But I think, to your point, if you can train people to be curious and inquisitive, and just fundamentally when they start any job or go into their job or at their job now, just ask, like, how do we actually make money? Like, is it better if I sell the burger or should I be selling the milkshakes, right? What matters?